Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Yoda Bolt fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, it's time to talk about trades. Trades. Who doesn't love talking a little bit of trades, right? Well, for me personally, I was hoping not to have to talk about trades so desperately at this point of the season. Because the Chargers, man, this last 2022 offseason, among the most impressive I've ever seen as a Chargers fan, right? Khalil Mack, J.C. Jackson, a solid draft. Things were looking on the up and up. Lo and behold, injuries, poor coaching, which we talked about extensively in my last video, have really derailed this season. And right now, dudes, with the Chargers having thrown down the gauntlet in the offseason, it may be too late to go back. There's no going back at this point. You have to correct things. You have to get this team back on track. And there are ways to do that via trade and other acquisitions before the trade deadline that you can help right the ship. And it's coming at a beautiful time for the Chargers. It's our Week 8 bye week, which happens to fall on the last Sunday before the trade deadline on November 1st. So it's time to get this team back on track, Bolt fam. And to do that, I got my top 10 Chargers trade deadline targets in order to help supplement that. Now, before we do kick things off, guys, quick shout out to our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. We got Thursday Night Football coming up tomorrow. You guys can use my code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. And maybe take a look on Twitter. I always post my pick'ems on there. Should be a very good time. Now, before we do officially kick off this video, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. Small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into it. Lights, camera, action. My top 10 Chargers trade deadline targets that they must consider before the November 1st trade deadline hits. Now, we're going to actually start things off with some honorable mentions, some guys that I think, man, would be so fun to see on the Chargers, but maybe there's a red flag here or there in terms of money or health that are holding me back from adding them to the top 10. So first off, we'll talk about this guy, Kadarius Toney. This would be a great ad, right? I think that the first day I saw his name mentioned in terms of trades, I had a lot of Chargers fans saying, hey, director, let's go get this guy. You know what? The thought of that is very exciting. But to me, as great as he would be with that lightning speed and the shift ability, very nice agility, I just don't know about it because of his health. He's currently battling a hamstring injury. And I think Chargers fans know exactly how troublesome that can be and how lingering that can be with our guy, Keenan Allen. Right now, the Chargers down Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer. Bringing in another wide receiver is a must, but I'm not quite sure about bringing another wide receiver in that also carries injury concern for this season. We need a guy right now. So Kadarius Toney's going to be my first honorable mention. Next up's going to be Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt. I can't even say his name. Kareem Hunt is a great talent, we'll say, right? Even putting aside the things I feel about his character, I feel like he's a great football player. However, I don't feel like running back is as big of a need as other positions, especially one that would be, at least requiring a 4th round pick to go out there and acquire. Now, Kareem Hunt with the Chargers would definitely be exciting, right? He would add that level of, talent that we need at RB2. The thing is, we have an RB2 that we're waiting to return from injury. That's going to be a big narrative of today's video. We got a guy, but we're waiting for him to come back. But Joshua Kelly, to me, is the guy. And when he does come back, what do we do with Kareem Hunt? He would be kind of a one-season one-off, and I just don't know if that's the kind of thing the Chargers are looking for at the running back position right now. And my last honorable mention is going to be Jerry Hughes. Jerry Hughes, again, at the Houston Texans, edge player, by the way, great talent. I think he'd be a solid add altogether for the Chargers, even with Joey Bosa returning. But again, Joey Bosa is returning. I think at this point he's, 4 or 5 weeks out. This would mean that Jerry Hughes, as good as he is, would serve as a backup at some point. Is that a bad idea? Not necessarily. I think that wouldn't be a terrible thing for the Chargers, but still, with how expensive he'll likely be, it would be an expensive backup nonetheless. So those are going to be my top 3 honorable mentions for this video before we do officially get into the top 10. You guys ready? Let's get into the top 10. My top 10 players that I'm looking for the Chargers to target. First one, it's a running back. Haha, we got you with that Kareem Hunt stint, didn't we? Well, at the same time, it still does kind of make sense, right? The Chargers, their running game has not been great this season. It's been one of the worst in the NFL, which is very worrisome. This offense is going to be a big point of emphasis to the Chargers going out there and grabbing players to help fix it. The offense needs a lot of help. And I think maybe bringing in a running back isn't a bad idea at this point with Sony Michel disappointing. Isaiah Spiller, we still don't really know what we have in him. I'm really hoping that he can step into that role. But for right now, maybe a cheaper running back is the way to go, right? The running game is very bad. We probably need to bring somebody in. If we do, let's get somebody on the cheap. And Dearness Johnson would be cheap, right? He would both provide solid depth and immediate value, as we could play him right now. And maybe he could even compete for RB2 later. But as of right now, I definitely favor a cheaper option like Dearness Johnson than a more expensive option than Kareem Hunt. He could be had for like a 6th-round pick. His contract is very reasonable. I just worry that the Chargers running back room would once again get maybe a bit too crowded. You're probably going to have to cut somebody like a Sony Michel in order to make room for that. Is that a worst idea? Maybe not, but that's why we're going to list him here at number 10 in our top 10 video. Here at number 9, we got another big name, one that we talked about extensively this offseason, one that would get Chargers fans very excited, and that's going to be Roequan Smith. Okay, I know. We got bigger fish to fry in terms of positions of need right now, right? But at the same time, Roequan is just such a huge talent, I could not include him on this list. I feel like it's just something that makes a lot of sense to the Chargers in terms of we got Brandon Staley. It's a scheme fit. The Chargers defense, they've been okay, but they have been underperforming with how we rehauled it and overhauled it this offseason. An ad like Roequan Smith could really, really turn things around. Now, I will mention that the Chargers linebackers, they've been performing pretty good this season, right? K9 Kenneth Murray has really turned it around since his last season, which was very disappointing. Drew Tranquill's out there doing Drew Tranquill things. But Roequan, this ad is inevitably would be such a huge boost to this defense. He would boost, what, our run defense, our pass defense over the middle. It would be pretty big, pretty significant. But he also would not come cheap. This is why he's so low on this list. I think it would take at least a 2nd-round pick, maybe a 1st. That's a likeliness, at the cheapest that you're going to be able to get him. So I don't foresee the Chargers going after him, as we do have more worrisome positions to tackle at this point. But again, with his links to Brandon Staley and running that system and knowing that system, the big playability, it could be that boost that takes the Chargers defense over the edge, and it would be one that Chargers fans would love to see. I just don't know if it makes as much sense as other guys we're going to be listing here in the top 10. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about cornerback. We lost J.C. Jackson, which is a huge bummer. And again, he was starting to show signs of figuring it out. The Chargers were allowing him to play a bit more press man, and it seems like we're on our way to seeing a very fun matchup between him and DK Metcalf. Unfortunately, he did go down, and that really does suck. 27's in the chat. However, I think the Chargers would be wise to go out there, maybe pick up another depth guy. And for that, I'm going to list here at number 8, Bryce Hall, cornerback out of the New York Jets. Now, to me, this man is a man corner as well, okay? And the Chargers, again, coming into the offseason, I really felt that we were going to be a predominantly man defense. We've seen a lot of zone. It feels like the Chargers were kind of dancing with that idea last week before JC went down. Hey, man, let's run a little bit more man. We got Asante Samuel. We got Bryce Callahan. We got JC. Let's run a little bit more man. It seems to have been working before everything just kind of fell apart with that JC injury. Maybe the Chargers do go back to that well going forward, and Bryce Hall would be a very nice man corner ad. He'd be very, very, very cheap as well. He's not going to be JC out there. He's not even going to be maybe a cornerback 3 out there, but at the same time, he's the kind of guy that can provide depth. Let Michael Davis start while protecting your depth, right? And he would be cheap. 6th, maybe 7th-round pick. Hall also does still have a 1.5 years left on his rookie contract, which, again, a microscopic price in comparison to other cornerbacks you go out there looking for. I think it would be pretty solid in terms of depth. It's smart to go out there and address these positions with guys that fit your system, that fit, quality depth when you can, especially when you're put in a situation like the J.C. Jackson injury. So for that, again, maybe not the most exciting name, but Bryce Hall is one to consider. And then lastly, before we get into the most important position, I know everybody's eager to see about the wide receivers, but I promise you they are coming. The last position outside of wide receiver at number 7 is going to be Riley Reiff, right tackle out of the Chicago Bears. Funny enough, I couldn't find a photo of him in a Chicago Bears uniform because they really haven't used him this season, which is really peculiar. But at the same time, it does open up the possibility of the Chicago Bears actually moving on from him, which is pretty nice, right? Now, I will be honest in saying that the Chargers offensive line, they're in a pretty solid spot, right? If you guys were here a couple of years ago in the Phillip Rivers era, it was pretty bad for a very, very long time. So the offensive line isn't in the worst of positions. But there is one thing that I'm trying to avoid, right? I'm trying to avoid Storm Norton. And that is the whole point behind Riley Reiff being on this list. The Chargers do have Trey Pipkins out there at right tackle, and he's been pretty serviceable. But a trade for a guy like Riley Reiff would not only provide competition at the position, maybe he does beat out Trey Pipkins at some point, but more importantly, it switches the Chargers swing tackle situation from Storm Norton to one of those guys, Reiff or Pipkins, and that is a much better situation to put yourself in rather than relying on Norton just in case something does happen down the road. Norton is the kind of guy, I hate to say it, that could really derail the season with his poor play, and I just can't allow him to stay on the roster. Maybe they can find a guy via free agency to do that, but at this point, we need to find a new swing tackle, and Riley Reiff not only provides the competition for a starting position, but as well as a nice, change at swing tackle, and he could be asked for pretty cheap, I think. 5th or 6th round pick, I think wouldn't be too unreasonable for the Chargers to go out there and solve that issue. Now, Chargers fans, let's get into the wide receiver position. This first one's not going to be as exciting, okay? But you know what? How many more guys do we have on this list? We're only about halfway through into it, and the rest of them are wide receivers. The first one we're going to talk about here is Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver for the New England Patriots. Now, I understand, Chargers fans, Bourne is not a speed demon. He wasn't born with the need for speed. I get that. That's why he's the lowest wide receiver on this list. But he does provide, solid play at most other things, right? Great hands, decent route running. With Mike Williams and Josh Palmer sidelined right now, with Keenan Allen coming back from a hamstring injury, the Chargers need a contributor right now. And I feel like with how the Chargers have been running their offense, maybe Kendrick Bourne wouldn't be a bad idea. But again, one of the biggest things that the Chargers need to solve right away is giving Justin Herbert a freaking speed option. So one of my conditions with adding Kendrick Bourne is that we do go out there and also add a speed option for Justin Herbert. So Kendrick Bourne is a two-part deal. You can add him. He's a solid wide receiver. He's not going to be too expensive to go out there and get, but you also have to provide him a speed option. Those are my conditions, okay? And with the Chargers, already lacking speed, this cannot be the one and only trade or the one and only acquisition of wide receiver. I would be okay with Kendrick Bourne, but you have to bring in a speed guy as well. So speaking of which, another speed guy, another New England Patriot, we're going to talk about Nelson Agholor. Okay, again, this is number 6 and 5. Okay, not the most exciting names, but they are names that add something to the Chargers where they're hurting very bad at wide receiver. And Nelson Agholor, I still will mention, was a name I struggled to add to this list, but I feel like it was a necessary decision. Agholor, I feel like, is known for his drops, right? Let's be straight to the point and honest about it. Agholor struggles in holding on to the football. And it was, for the most part, the most highlighted and disappointing start to his career, right? That's what you knew him for. That was his main problem. And the Chargers already see plenty of drops. We don't need any more of that. We don't want to be adding a guy with drop issues because we already got our issues of our own. That's already worrisome. But I will mention that in recent years, I think starting with the Raiders, funny enough, he has gotten much better. Much, much better. And I don't want the hang-up of his early struggles to hold the Chargers away from adding a speed option, if that makes sense. It still is a risk. And again, he's number 5. At the same time, the Chargers need speed so desperately. I would be okay with them pursuing a Nelson Agholor. The biggest reason I have him over a guy like Bourne is definitely the speed. We need speed so bad, especially with Jalen Guyton now gone. DeAndre Carter is pretty fast, but not the fastest guy in the world. We cannot just rely on him to stretch the field. We need to get another guy. And Nelson Agholor is one of the faster guys you're going to find out there in terms of trade. Right? He's got the same speed as Jalen Guyton, I think running a 4.39 or something like that. And if his play holds up from previous seasons, he would be a great wide receiver 4 or 5. To add that speed option on the roster. So I'm just going to toss it out there. It's not my favorite option, but it's one that you have to mention. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. Some of the big names that Chargers fans are excited to talk about. Let's talk about here at number 4, one of the bigger stars from the last couple of seasons in terms of newer wide receivers. It's going to be Chase Claypool, wide receiver out of Pittsburgh. Now, the reason he's not a little bit higher, we'll get into that in just a second, but as a player, Chase Claypool, very good, right? He's got great size, great speed. I think a 4.42, definitely one of the faster wide receivers the Chargers would have on the roster. But what I like about him is that he plays very similarly to Mike Williams, right? He does have a bit of the route running, but he's primarily known for that possession receiver kind of work. And I do feel with Mike Williams out this season, maybe they can still supplement a lot of what Justin Herbert's comfortable with in a guy like Chase Claypool. He's a proven talent. But on the other side of that, the double-edged sword on that is that he would be expensive, right? I think the Steelers would be wise to ask for like a second-round pick at the very worst, and then some. I don't know if that's a bit too sweet for the Chargers' blood, though, because the Chargers, they could feature 2 outside guys, right? Where does Claypool fit after Mike Williams comes back is what I'm trying to ask. I feel like having Williams on one side at the X position, and then Chase Claypool opposite him with Keenan Allen in the slot, that could actually work. But at this point, it might just be overkill, right? Especially with how expensive that he would be to acquire, you know, and especially with Chase Claypool's extension coming up. We have to remember we're going to have to pay this guy later down on the road. So I do feel like Chase Claypool being a very nice option, and one inevitably Chargers fans would be super excited about, may just not fit the margins of what we're looking for right now. But I had to include him because this would be a huge, huge addition for the Chargers at a position that they desperately need things that he would provide: size and speed. All right. Let's get into my top 3 players here. And again, spoiler alert, they're all wide receivers. That's going to be the biggest position the Chargers need to address right away. Here at number 3, it's an old familiar face, an oldie but a goodie. We're going to talk about Brandon Cooks, wide receiver out of Houston. Now, Cooks, again, he's been a name that we've wanted for a long time. I feel like we've covered him extensively here on the channel, especially in the offseason before he did end up getting an extension from the Houston Texans that took him off the table. But still, we have to consider Brandon Cooks because of his skill set. He's not only fast, he's a speed demon. Still a speed demon, even being on the wrong side of 30, right? Still a speed demon, but he also offers that playability in terms of route running and hands. A very well-rounded wide receiver, even if he is a bit older. But again, on the flip side of it, being older should make his price a bit cheaper. I feel like a 3rd or 4th round pick was definitely what the Texans would have been asking for if he were to have been traded in the 2022 offseason. At this point, I think you can get away with the 5th round pick, maybe even a 6th, because now he holds age and money behind him, right? 30 years old. He's got a pretty big contract that he signed with the Texans. I think it was a 2-year, $39 million contract. It would take the asking price in terms of draft compensation down quite a bit. And again, this is the kind of guy you add to a Chargers system with Justin Herbert. He's going to make some big plays. You're on a 4-3-3, big speed demon, the kind of speed that the Chargers fans have desperately been asking for, and one that this team desperately does need. But again, just like we mentioned with his contract, the one thing holding me back from really wanting to pull the trigger on Brandon Cooks is the money that has already been committed to him. 2 years, $39 million is a lot of money. And the Chargers, at this point, I don't really think they want to add another big wide receiver to their books right now. They got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams locked up for a while, and both those guys are making a pretty decent number every single season. Can we fit Brandon Cooks? I think we could, but I'm not convinced that, again, a wide receiver over 30 years old, as amazing as he is right now and as short that commitment would be, it's still a lot of money. Still, it's one I had to put at number 3 because if I woke up tomorrow and said the Chargers have acquired Brandon Cooks in a trade with the Houston Texans, I'd be losing my mind. I'd be like, oh, finally, we're going to unleash the Justin Herbert H-bomb and get things back on track. That's the kind of impact that he can have. So again, a bit expensive, one that I see less likely because of that price tag, but at the same time, he would be a huge difference maker. Let's get into the top 2, guys. And these top 2, they make so much sense on so many levels, and they would add so much to this Chargers offense. Let's start here with Elijah Moore at number 2, wide receiver for the New York Jets. And I really struggled with these last 2 guys, man. I struggled on who to put at the number 1 spot. Who do I want more, as well as who do I think is most likely the Chargers are going to be able to acquire. And in that thinking, I put Elijah Moore here at number 2. Elijah Moore. Blazing speed, very similar to Brandon Cooks. You're on a 4-3-4. And just like Brandon Cooks, he's got all-around great play skills, right? I think you could compare him very much to Brandon Cooks, but much, much younger. Very skilled receiver who possesses more than just speed. And that, to me, is the magic phrasing right there. A speed option that provides more than just speed. That's where you get closer to Tyreek Hill than you do, let's say, a John Ross, who is very fast but can provide very little more. And that's why Elijah Moore is so attractive, especially to the Chargers. But it gets even better. He's hugely valuable towards the cap as well. He still has 2.5 years left on his rookie deal. This is spectacular timing if you're a Chargers fan. The money's tight right now. The money's very tight after going all in 2022. If we're going to add a guy on a rookie deal, that's especially attractive. One that has the speed that we need. One that has the playmaking skills that we need. This is a huge, huge deal. And on top of that, he requested a trade publicly. And whenever we see that, time and time again, it does soften the asking price of the team that they're moving away from. DeAndre Hopkins, probably the most dramatic example, but things like that do happen, and it could in some way happen with Elijah Moore as well. I would believe that Elijah Moore, if the Jets were serious about trading him away, they would maybe ask for a second-round pick and like a third-round pick or something like that. He's a very talented wide receiver. But because of him publicly asking for a trade, you might be able to get away with just a little bit less. But me personally, I talked about this topic, I think, in my last video. I'm gonna go over it again now, having read a little bit more on the topic. I don't really know if the Jets are willing to trade him because they know the talent of Elijah Moore as well. And they know that, he's definitely going to be part of their future plans if they continue to feature him as their wide receiver. So I'm not quite sure if they're going to be willing to give him up at a discounted price. I don't think he's going to be cheap. I'm thinking maybe a second-round pick, third, fourth, somewhere in that range. And it might end up being a little bit too pricey for the Chargers in terms of draft pick compensation. Still, if he can be had for like a third-round pick or cheaper, I'm pulling the trigger immediately on Elijah Moore. This is a very, very good wide receiver, one that you're not going to find the same talent in those rounds anyway. I pull the trigger immediately. And you know what? In that same breath, I will say I'd be supportive of a decision to send a second-round pick to the Jets in exchange for DJ Moore or for Elijah Moore because of that talent. You're not going to find a wide receiver in the second round as good as Elijah Moore. And I feel very confident in that. So if the Chargers want to trade a second-round pick for Elijah Moore, a pick that we would likely spend in a wide receiver anyway, I'm about it. But in the end, it may end up being too expensive for the Chargers, and in the end, the Jets just may not be willing to deal him at this time. But still, it's one that you have to consider, and one that I have that name circled on my wish list. If we can get Elijah Moore, that's one of the best possible situations for the Chargers, both financially, talent-wise, and the skill set that he brings to the table. Now, at number one, director, if Elijah Moore's not number one, then who's number one? At number one, it's another Jets wide receiver. And this one goes by the name of Denzel Mims. Okay, I get it. Everybody hold your horses here for just a second. You guys are going to be like, director, you put in Denzel Mims before Elijah Moore and number one instead. Just hear me out of my reasoning for this, okay? Elijah Moore, to me, I had to balance the scales in terms of who I want and who I think the Chargers could realistically go out there and get. I want Elijah Moore, obviously. I think he's the more well-rounded wide receiver with the better speed, but I think Denzel Mims is attainable. And Denzel Mims is a heck of a wide receiver, in my opinion, one that has been grossly underutilized by the Jets this past season. I think he's been healthy. I just feel like he's not been active for some reason. The Jets are going to understand more about that than we do, but at the same time, the Chargers have a need with the kind of skill set that Denzel Mims could provide. Denzel Mims, great speed. He ran a 4.38. I think that's slightly faster than Jalen Guyton, if you guys want a good reference to that. And that's pretty dang fast. He's got plenty of upside in my mind, too. He's also got great size. This man is 6'3". I went through and watched some of his tape, and I was like, wow, that's a big boy out there. I did not expect that speed to be matched up with that height and that size. And you know what you can do with that? You can supplement a little bit of what you need from Mike Williams, right? A bit of that jump ball ability, a bit of that mismatch ability that exists with Denzel Mims. Another big thing about Denzel Mims that's a bit reminiscent of Elijah Moore is that he also requested a trade, but it was a bit earlier this year in the offseason. And you know what? From what I'm hearing, it almost happened. The Jets almost pulled the trigger, and they decided not to at the last second. At that point in time, I think they were asking for somewhere around a fourth-round pick. Now that some time has passed, he's not even been active for the team. If they decide to trade him, it's going to be for significantly less. And I still think that Denzel Mims is a much more likely candidate to be traded than Elijah Moore at this time. I think this is actually very, very possible. And he'd be very cheap at this point. There's a very good chance that he could be had for like a 6th-round pick at this point. And it's because the talent that you're realistically getting in Denzel Mims is a lot closer to, let's say, a Jalen Guyton, who's very good for the Chargers, but maybe as a featured receiver, not so much for other teams. But he's not going to be as good as an Elijah Moore, right? That featured wide receiver. But for what the Chargers need right now, I think Denzel Mims is a very good option. And again, he has unknown upside at this point just because he has not been used at all, if not at all, this season. A big thing I love about him as well, in looking into his story, why he hasn't been used, and the kind of things that led him up to this point where he might actually get traded. One thing that I kind of stumbled on is that he's a hugely positive human being. Supportive teammate, but despite being buried on the depth chart for so many weeks, this is the kind of character that you want on the Chargers. He's a very good character a character fit for this locker room. And that's the kind of guy I want on my team. He's on his 3rd year of his rookie deal as well, so the same upside or the same benefit that we saw with Elijah Moore, you would get it on a shorter time period, but you would still get it with Denzel Mims. And this would buy the Chargers a season and a half of cheap upside with the chance to add a permanent speed receiver down the road if he does play well. I see the risk reward at a very reasonable rate here with Denzel Mims. He fits exactly what this team is looking for right now. The big speed, explosive plays. Maybe he's not the most well-rounded wide receiver, but he's going to be coming on the cheap with a low commitment, right? Not too expensive, adds that nice speed. Not sure, he's the most polished wide receiver on this list, but he makes the most sense for the Bolts right now. Even with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Palmer returning at some point, I still feel like Mims will play a role with this team. And let's say even with Jalen Guyton. Him and Jalen Guyton could be, the brand new version of Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson. That's kind of how I view Denzel Mims. And honestly, again, it's the unknown upside that gets me especially excited about Denzel Mims, because we just don't know what he could look like. He was a second-round pick. We don't know what that talent looks like yet because he's been playing with quarterbacks in the New York Jets, which those guys could turn out great later, but as of the time that he's been playing with Denzel Mims, I'm just not quite sure about that. So Denzel Mims is going to round out this list as my number one trade acquisition for the Chargers, the guy that they got to go after. I would still expect them to go out there and sign a wide receiver via free agency or the practice squad or whatever, but if you're going to add some talent to help the team right now and help alleviate some of those injury concerns right now, I think Denzel Mims makes the most sense. Again, if you can get an Elijah Moore, I do prefer that. And that's a much bigger talent, but it might be more expensive. Same thing with Brandon Cooks and Chase Claypool. These guys, better talents, but way more expensive. And the Chargers just kind of need somebody to help supplement them right now. And I feel like Denzel Mims is kind of that guy. My bottom line in this video, Chargers must do something. You guys heard my whole speech at the beginning. It's too late to go back. It is way too late to turn back. The ownership, the team, the GMs, they have thrown down this offseason, and they've got to make some moves to right the ship. I feel like the Chargers are due for at least one of these trades. Again, Denzel Mims makes the most sense to me, but you could add in maybe another guy like Kendrick Bourne. That would definitely help out the wide receivers. You could add in another guy like Reiff for depth at the lineman position. You could add another cornerback, and a lot of these guys would come in pretty cheap. I would say one or two trades would definitely help me feel better, as well as maybe a free agent or two acquisition. As of recording this video, I think the Chargers are adding Jeremiah Tauchu, the ex-Charger from so long ago, to help supplement that edge position while we wait for Joey Bosa. That's a good start. I wasn't expecting anybody huge in terms of acquiring for an edge position because we do have Joey Bosa coming back, but that's a good start. Now go out and get me a wide receiver. And I think, Tom, if you're listening, it's got to come via trade, and it's got to be one of these speed demons. Kendrick Bourne is okay, right? But we need to get somebody out there to help stretch the field for Justin Herbert, and that's why these guys are so much higher on my list, and that's why Denzel Mims, in terms of talent, in terms of his speed, in terms of his value and his price, makes the most sense to me as a Chargers fan. You guys in the comment section, let me know. Let me know if there's any other rumors floating around in terms of players that you would like the Chargers to go out there and acquire. I'm sure there's some that I have missed on this list, but wide receiver being the top position the Chargers need, these are the guys that I feel most confident in. Well, guys, if you did enjoy what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. Let us know your thoughts in terms of what the Chargers need to do to help right the ship during this bye-week break for the Bolts, and also let me know your thoughts on some of the guys I put on this list, like Denzel Mims and Elijah Moore. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Denzel Mims, man, trust me, this is the new Guyton. This is the guy.